I'm Marcus Reed. I'm here for the interview.
Marcus, you're the man who stopped to help me,
Wait, you're the CEO?
and I'm the one interviewing you.
8:17, Marcus Reed was standing at the security desk of Vela Motion Systems with rain drying in pale streaks across his charcoal suit and a red no-show banner already glowing beside his name. He was a 38-year-old black father with close-cropped hair, an interview confirmation in one hand, and 12 years of in-industrial automation experience behind him. His appointment was for 8:00. The email allowed candidates a 20-minute check-in window. The recruiter glanced at the clock, then at Marcus's damp cuffs. Senior operations candidates are expected to manage their time better than this. Marcus set his phone beside the visitor tablet and opened the confirmation. It says check in through 8:20. The recruiter, Natalie Price, barely looked. She wore a Vela badge clipped high on her blazer and had the efficient impatience of someone already rewriting the story in her head. That window is for building access problems. It isn't permission to arrive late. That's not what it says. The security officer, 2 steps away, shifted his attention toward them. Marcus noticed that before Natalie did. He also noticed the candidate waiting near the glass doors, a white man about his age, checking his watch with a paper coffee cup tucked under one arm. Natalie had greeted that man by name when Marcus walked in. Marcus could still feel gravel pressed into his right knee from 40 minutes earlier. 3 miles from the Vela campus, he had seen a silver crossover angled against a curb with its hazard lights flashing. A woman in a navy raincoat was crouched beside an older man who had fallen while crossing from a bus shelter. Traffic was backing up around them. Marcus had pulled over because the older man could not put weight on his ankle, and the woman was trying unsuccessfully to keep him steady while calling for help. He had known what stopping might cost him. His daughter Nia had asked over breakfast whether he would finally be home for dinner if he got this job. Vela's automation supervisor position meant one shift, no rotating overnight calls, and enough money to stop accepting weekend repair work. Marcus had promised only that he would try. Then he had spent 12 minutes holding an umbrella over a stranger while helping the injured man onto a bench and flagging down the arriving paramedics. The woman in the raincoat had looked at his suit afterward. "You're headed somewhere important." Interview. Her face had tightened. "Because of this? Because I stopped. That part's mine." She had asked his name. Marcus had given only his first before running back to his truck. Now Natalie tapped her keyboard. "I can mark you as present, but the panel has moved on." Marcus looked through the interior glass toward the production floor. Yellow autonomous carts moved between assembly cells, pausing at striped pedestrian lanes. Above them, a maintenance board displayed fault codes in blocks of amber text. One code caught his eye, repeated encoder drift on line 4. He had spent 4 years solving exactly that kind of intermittent failure at a medical device plant. The panel was scheduled until 9:15, he said. Natalie's expression sharpened. "You seem very focused on what you believe you're entitled to." Marcus felt the sentence before he answered it, not because it was loud, because it was polished enough to sound reasonable later. "I'm focused on the process you sent me." The other candidate looked over now. Natalie lowered her voice. "Mr. Reed, this role supervises 73 people. Reliability and judgment matter. Showing up 17 minutes late and arguing with recruiting doesn't help demonstrate either." Marcus almost told her about the injured man. He stopped himself. The explanation was true, but he disliked how quickly the room had made him feel required to earn back a presumption the email said he had not lost. "Please note that I arrived inside the written check-in window," he said, "and please don't mark me as a no-show." Natalie turned the monitor slightly away from him and clicked twice. The red banner remained. "Your application has been closed for failure to appear at the scheduled interview time." The security officer looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Marcus picked up his phone, photographed the lobby clock beside the check-in screen, and saved the confirmation email offline before putting the device back into his pocket. Then the revolving door behind him began to turn. The woman in the navy raincoat stepped into the lobby, carrying the same wet umbrella Marcus had held over a stranger less than an hour earlier. Marcus recognized her before she lowered the umbrella. Natalie recognized something else. She straightened so quickly that the movement seemed to pull the rest of the lobby with it. The security officer removed his hand from the edge of the desk. Even the other candidate shifted his coffee to his left hand and stood a little taller. Mims. Ellison, Natalie said. The woman looked first at Marcus, then at the red status bar still visible on the monitor. Natalie had turned halfway away. Rain had darkened the shoulders of her coat, and a thin scrape crossed one knuckle where she had caught the older man's elbow against the curb. She did not look like someone arriving for ceremony. She looked irritated, cold, and late. "Good morning," she said. "What happened here?" Natalie recovered quickly. "Contritiant check-in issue. Mr. Reed arrived after his scheduled time, and I was explaining that the panel had already moved forward." The woman set the umbrella into a brass stand near the desk. 17 minutes. Marcus watched Natalie omit the rest. Ms. Ellison glanced at him. "And the check-in window?" Natalie paused. It lasted no more than a second, but Marcus saw the security officer notice it too. "The interview time is 8, Natalie said. "We ask candidates to treat that as firm." "That wasn't my question." Marcus felt an unexpected irritation at the satisfaction that flickered through him. He pushed it down. He did not want rescue by hierarchy any more than he had wanted to plead with Natalie 5 minutes earlier. "The email says candidates may check in until 8:20, he said. "She says that applies only to building access delays." Miss Ellison held out a hand. "May I see it?" Marcus passed her his phone. She read the message without comment, scrolling once. Near the entrance, an autonomous cleaning unit gave a soft warning chirp before changing direction around a wet floor cone. The ordinary sound made the silence at the desk feel less theatrical than it otherwise might have. Ms. Ellison handed the phone back. "There's no exception stated." Natalie folded her hands. "The recruiting guidance we received was to protect panel time. We've had applicants use that language as a grace period." "That may be a real problem," Ms. Ellison said, "but then the language needs to change. We don't invent a narrower rule at the desk." Natalie's face tightened, though only slightly. "I was also considering fit, Mr." He became argumentative. Marcus looked at her. "I asked you not to close my application while I was still inside the written window. You challenged me repeatedly. Twice." The security officer lowered his eyes, and Marcus understood that the man had been counting 2. Miss Ellison looked toward him. "Officer?" He hesitated. His badge read H. Cole. He showed the confirmation when he arrived. He didn't raise his voice. Natalie turned. "I didn't say he raised his voice. No. Mom, that small correction changed the shape of the conversation." Marcus could see Natalie hearing it too. Miss Ellison slipped off her raincoat and draped it over one arm. "Reopen the application." Natalie's hands remained still. "The panel's already interviewing." "Then confirm whether they can take him before the published window and scheduled block are over." B. "Don't remove another candidate. Don't shorten anyone else's interview. Just follow the process we sent him." For the first time, Marcus heard uncertainty beneath Natalie's professionalism. "Of course." She turned back to the monitor and entered her credentials. The red banner disappeared, replaced by a gray status field. Review pending." Marcus stared at it longer than he meant to. Ms. Ellison stepped beside him. "I owe you an explanation, too. The gentleman this morning was my former plant manager. He insisted on taking the bus because he hates being driven anywhere. The ambulance crew says the ankle is probably fractured, but he's stable. I'm glad. And you missed part of your morning because you stopped." Marcus gave a tired half smile. "Looks like I'm still working out how much of it." She nodded, accepting the answer instead of turning it into a compliment. "Fair." Natalie finished a call and covered the receiver. "They can see him at 8:45. Marcus checked the clock. 1 minute. Ms. Ellison picked up her umbrella. "Good. Then I'll see you upstairs." Marcus frowned. She was already walking toward the secured doors when Natalie said very carefully, "Mr. Reed, that's Evelyn Ellison." Marcus waited. Natalie looked at him as if the rest should have been obvious. "Chief Executive Officer." Marcus watched the elevator doors close behind the woman he had left beside a bus shelter in the rain. Then he looked back at Natalie. "I still want the interview judged on my work." At 8:42, Marcus sat outside Conference Room C with a paper cup of water untouched between his hands. Through the glass wall, he could see part of Vela's assembly floor below. Entries traveling on overhead rails, pallet fixtures locking into position, technicians in gray shirts moving between guarded cells. A stack light on line 4 flashed amber twice, went dark, then flashed again. The encoder fault from the lobby board had not cleared. A coordinator opened the door. "Mr. Reed?" Inside, 3 people waited at a narrow table. Evelyn Ellison sat at the far end with a legal pad instead of a laptop. Beside her were Samuel Cho, Director of Manufacturing, and Denise Harper from People Operations. Natalie was not there. Marcus noticed that immediately, then wished he had not. He needed to stop treating every absence as a message. Samuel stood and shook his hand. "We understand there was confusion downstairs." Marcus sat. There was a decision downstairs. Denise glanced at Evelyn before opening Marcus's resume. "Their distinction. We've restored your application, and the interview will be the full scheduled length." Marcus nodded, though he was still carrying enough anger to make every courtesy feel suspicious. That was the danger now. Natalie had made one bad judgment about him, and he could feel himself preparing to make 3 in return. Samuel began with the plant's expansion plan. Vela was adding 2 automated packaging lines while keeping the existing floor operational, and the supervisor would inherit a mixed crew of senior technicians, new hires, and contractors. "Tell me about a time you inherited unreliable equipment and a tired team." The question steadied Marcus. This was work. He described a sterilization plant outside Baltimore, where intermittent servo failures had been blamed on maintenance discipline. Instead of replacing components one by one, Marcus had compared fault timing against washdown cycles and discovered moisture entering a junction enclosure through a poorly seated cable gland. He explained how he changed inspection intervals, retrained 2 shifts, and stopped technicians from being written up for failures they had not caused. Samuel leaned forward. "What made you question the maintenance reports? They were too consistent." Evelyn looked up from her notes. Marcus continued. 3 crews, different experience levels, same fault within the same 15-minute band after washdown. Either everybody suddenly forgot how to inspect a servo, or the process was producing the same failure. Denise asked how he handled the supervisor who had blamed the technicians. "Badly at first," Marcus said. The answer surprised all 3 of them. "I walked into his office with the trend sheet and treated the pattern like it was a verdict. I was right about the equipment and wrong about how I brought it to him. He spent the next week defending himself instead of helping me fix it." "What did you change?" Denise asked. "I stopped trying to win the conversation. I asked him to walk the line with me." For the first time that morning, Marcus forgot about the lobby. Then the amber stack light below flashed again. Samuel followed his gaze. "You've noticed line 4. Encoder drift?" Samuel gave a small smile. "You saw the board downstairs." Marcus nodded. "What's driving it? We're still isolating the cause." Marcus almost offered a theory. The old reflex rose quickly. "Prove you belong before someone decides you do not." He stopped himself. "I'd want the trend data before guessing." Evelyn made a note. 20 minutes later, Denise closed the resume. "One procedural question before we finish. Recruiting marked an additional note before your application was reopened." Marcus felt his shoulders tighten. She turned the tablet toward him. "Candidate demonstrated confrontational response to standard check-in guidance." "That is not what happened," Marcus said. Denise's voice stayed neutral. "We're not treating it as established fact. I'm asking whether you want to provide a response for the record." Marcus looked at Evelyn. She did not intervene. He understood why, and for one irritated second he resented her for it anyway. He had assumed that because the CEO had witnessed the lobby, the false description would simply disappear. But erasing it would leave no trace that it had ever shaped the decision. "Yes," he said. "I want the original note preserved." Samuel stopped writing. Marcus pointed at the screen. "Keep the timestamp. Keep who entered it. Add my response and Officer Cole's account. Don't replace anything." Denise studied him. "You're asking us not to remove a negative note from your own file?" "I'm asking you not to clean up what happened after someone important saw it." Evelyn's pen went still. The interview ended at 9:37. Mark was halfway to the elevator when his phone vibrated with a message from Nia. "Did you get it?" He stared at the question, then typed, "Not yet." Interview happened. That's enough for this morning. Before he could send it, Denise stepped into the corridor behind him. "Mr. Reed, don't leave the building yet." She held the tablet against her chest. Officer Cole just submitted his incident statement. "The timestamp on Ms. Price's note creates a problem we need to address before your candidacy moves any further." Denise led Marcus away from the elevators and into a small interview room overlooking the employee parking lot. The rain had thinned to a gray mist, leaving beads of water along the window frame. She placed the tablet on the table but did not sit immediately. Officer Cole's statement says you entered the lobby at 8:16. The system shows Ms. Price marked you as a no-show at 8:14. Marcus looked at the screen. 2 minutes before I walked in. Yes, so the decision wasn't based on me being late. Denise pulled out the chair across from him. That's one of the questions we now have. The answer should have felt vindicating. Instead, Marcus thought about how close he had come to leaving without ever knowing the timing existed. He pictured Natalie's fingers moving over the keyboard while he stood there showing her the email. If Evelyn had not walked through the revolving door, the note would have remained simple. Late candidate, difficult attitude, closed application. Clean enough to survive, because nobody would have needed to look beneath it. His phone buzzed again. Nia had replied to his unfinished message with 3 question marks and a photograph of the burnt waffle she had apparently abandoned in the toaster before school. Marcus almost laughed. He had promised to text her before first period ended, and he had forgotten. "Can I have a minute?" Denise nodded and stepped into the corridor. Marcus called instead of texting. Nia answered in a whisper. "Dad, I'm in homeroom. You sent me a waffle crime scene. You didn't answer. The interview happened." There was a pause. "Did you get the job? I don't know. So why are you still there?" Marcus looked through the glass wall toward the corridor. Because something else happened. He heard the disappointment she tried to hide. For months he had spoken about Vela as if one better schedule could repair everything at once. Missed dinners, weekend calls, the science fair he had watched through a video because a conveyor motor failed 30 miles away. Nia had believed him because he had needed her to. "I might be late tonight," he said. "You said this job was supposed to make you less late." That landed harder than anything Natalie had said. Marcus closed his eyes. "Yeah, I did." A teacher called Naya's name in the background. She whispered, "Just don't turn it into one of your missions." The line went dead before Marcus could answer. Denise returned a moment later with Evelyn and Samuel. Evelyn stayed near the door. "We've asked recruiting operations to preserve the access logs and all edits associated with your application. Natalie has been removed from candidate-facing duties for the rest of today while that review begins." Marcus looked at her. "Because of me? Because the timestamp conflicts with the explanation she gave, and because there may be other applications handled the same way." There it was, the larger shape he had felt forming since the lobby. Samuel folded his arms. "There's another issue. That 20-minute check-in language has been in our candidate instructions for 11 months. Recruiting managers were given discretion to handle actual late arrivals, but nobody authorized them to close candidates before they arrived." Marcus thought about Natalie saying they had applicants who used that language as a grace period. It had sounded like a policy. Maybe it had only been a habit hardened into one. Evelyn pulled out a chair. "I want to be careful here. Your interview and this review need to remain separate. Samuel and Denise will make the hiring recommendation without me." Marcus frowned. "You were on the panel." "I was. That was a mistake once I recognized you." The admission surprised him more than an excuse would have. "I thought I could remain objective," she continued. "Then you asked us to preserve a note that hurt you instead of deleting it." "I realized my presence could influence the room in the other direction." Samuel nodded. "Your technical interview stands. We'll add a second evaluator this afternoon for an independent score." Marcus should have agreed immediately. Instead, tiredness pushed him somewhere less disciplined. "So I lose another afternoon because your process failed?" The words came sharper than he intended. "Listen." Samuel's expression cooled. Denise looked down at the tablet. Marcus heard Nia's warning in his head. "One of your missions." He rubbed a thumb over the worn edge of his interview folder. "That came out wrong." "I'm not saying don't verify it. I'm saying I took unpaid time for this morning and I have a daughter expecting me home tonight." Evelyn nodded. "That matters. We can schedule the second evaluation remotely tomorrow evening or compensate you for returning today under our candidate expense policy. Your choice." Marcus looked at the parking lot, where his truck sat beneath a dripping maple. The easy decision was to stay and finish everything while anger was still carrying him. Instead, he thought of a burnt waffle and a 14-year-old who had started treating his promises like estimated arrival times. "Tomorrow evening," he said. Denise entered the choice into the file. As Marcus stood, Samuel turned the tablet toward himself. A list had populated beneath the preserved recruiting log. 7 other senior-level applications had been closed before their published check-in windows expired. Marcus saw the dates before Samuel locked the screen. The problem had started long before he walked through the door. The next evening, Marcus propped his laptop on the corner of the dining table while Naya worked through algebra at the other end, headphones around her neck and a bowl of cereal balanced beside her notebook. He had changed out of his work boots but not his uniform shirt. The stitched patch from his current plant pulled slightly at the shoulder when he leaned toward the camera. Samuel Cho appeared first on the video call, followed by a maintenance manager Marcus had not met named Priya Shah. Denise joined only long enough to explain the format. Priya had received Marcus' resume and interview questions, but not the lobby incident or Evelyn's involvement. "She'll score the technical portion independently," Denise said. "Nothing from recruiting is part of that score." Marcus nodded. "Good." Priya shared a simplified fault history from a fictional packaging cell and asked him to walk through his first hour as supervisor. Marcus resisted the temptation to impress her with a diagnosis. He asked who had touched the machine, whether the fault followed temperature, product changeover, cleaning, or shift turnover, and whether maintenance notes were free text or selected from a fixed menu. Priya interrupted once. "You haven't told me what you think is broken. I don't know yet. What would make you comfortable saying you did? Enough information that I'd be risking the machine instead of somebody else's credibility." Naya looked up from her worksheet at that, but Marcus kept his eyes on the screen. Priya moved to a second scenario involving an experienced technician accused of skipping a lockout verification step. Marcus asked whether the verification record was time-stamped automatically or entered later. When Priya said later, he shook his head. "Then I wouldn't treat the missing entry as proof the step was skipped. I'd treat it as a reason to stop and reconstruct the work." For the first time, Priya smiled. "That answer tends to annoy production managers. I've been one of the annoyed people." Samuel leaned back. "Tell her why." Marcus told the shorter version of the sterilization plant story and admitted again that he had once carried correct data into the wrong conversation. Nia began erasing something on her worksheet so hard the table shook. After 46 minutes, Priya thanked him and left the call. Samuel remained. "You scored above our hiring benchmark," he said. Marcus waited. "There's a complication." "Of course there is." Samuel almost smiled, then did not. Recruiting review expanded today. The 7 applications we found yesterday were not random. 5 were marked as attitude, professionalism, or communication concerns before a recruiter had completed a formal screen. Marcus felt Naya stop erasing. Samuel continued. "We're not making conclusions about motive yet. His team is comparing the language, timestamps, disposition codes, and recruiter notes. They've also pulled a larger sample." "How large?" 48 senior operations applications from the last year. Marcus sat back. The refrigerator compressor clicked off behind him, leaving the room suddenly quieter. "Are you telling me because it affects my interview?" "Partly. You're placing the supervisor search on a short administrative hold, while the review determines whether the candidate pool was improperly narrowed." Marcus looked at the cereal bowl beside Naya's notebook. She had gone very still. "So I clear 2 interviews," he said, "and now the job freezes. How long?" "We expect an initial finding within several business days. I won't promise more than that." Marcus pressed 2 fingers against the edge of the table. This was exactly the kind of delay he could not explain with inspirational language. Rent still arrived on schedule. Shifts still paid real money. Nia still wanted to know whether he would be home. Samuel must have seen something change in his face. "You can withdraw and pursue other opportunities. If you stay in the process, your scores remain active." Marcus glanced at his daughter. She raised an eyebrow as if warning him not to make her responsible for the answer. "I'll stay," he said, "but I'm not putting everything else on hold. That's reasonable." After the call ended, Nia closed her laptop. "You did the mission thing." Marcus exhaled through his nose. "I answered interview questions. You also found another broken system." "I did not find it." She pointed her spoon at him. "You have a talent for standing near broken systems." That pulled a laugh out of him before he could stop it. Then his phone lit up with an email from Denise. Attached was a formal preservation notice confirming that candidate disposition records, recruiter edits, and access logs had been locked from alteration during the review. Near the bottom was one sentence Marcus read twice. The review had identified 17 applications requiring manual re-examination. By Thursday morning, the 17 applications had become more than a number on Marcus's phone. Denise called while he was replacing a photoelectric sensor at his current plant and asked whether he could come to Vela that afternoon, not for another interview, but to observe a live review of the hiring workflow as a candidate representative. Marcus almost refused. He had already spent enough unpaid hours inside somebody else's problem. Then she added that 2 of the reopened applicants had agreed to participate remotely, and Vela wanted someone who understood operations to challenge assumptions in the process without seeing protected demographic data. Marcus looked at the conveyor beside him. A carton passed the sensor, the beam broke, and the line advanced exactly once. Systems were supposed to make decisions that could be traced. "I can give you 90 minutes," he said. "After that, I leave." At Vela, Denise met him beside a training room overlooking Line 4. Evelyn was absent, as promised. Priya Shah sat with a compliance manager and a recruiting analyst Marcus had never met. On the wall, a projected workflow showed how applications moved from submission to recruiter screen, manager review, interview, and final disposition. The problem appeared in the space between the first 2 boxes. The analyst enlarged a drop-down menu. Recruiters can assign an early disposition code before completing the screening form. Marcus frowned. Why? To remove obvious mismatches quickly. Missing license, unavailable shift, salary range, things like that. That makes sense. The analyst clicked again. A second menu appeared. Communication concern, professionalism, culture, AD, other. Marcus stared at the last 4 options. Those aren't obvious mismatches. No, Denise explained that Natalie had not created the feature. The configuration was 3 years old, added when Vela doubled hiring volume and managers complained that recruiting was sending too many candidates forward. Recruiters were measured partly on how many applicants reached interviews without later being rejected for fit-related reasons. "So somebody built a shortcut," Marcus said, "and then attached a performance incentive to using judgment before the formal screen," Priya replied. The compliance manager opened 3 anonymized examples. One candidate had been marked communication concern after asking whether overnight travel was mandatory despite the posting saying 10% travel. Another had received professionalism after requesting captioning for a video interview. A third had been closed after asking for the name of the person who would evaluate a technical portfolio. Marcus leaned back. The documents did not prove that race drove every decision. It proved something narrower, and in its own way, uglier. Vela had built a place where subjective impressions could become permanent before candidates ever reached the stage designed to test them. "What happens to the 17?" he asked. "Each file gets a fresh review by a different recruiter and the relevant hiring manager," Denise said. "No original disposition notes until after the new assessment. Qualified applicants get restored where positions remain open, or contacted for comparable openings where they don't. And the recruiters review first. Consequences after findings. Natalie remains off candidate-facing work." Marcus nodded. That answer was slower than anger wanted and more credible because of it. Through the window, Line 4 stopped. A technician opened a guarded panel while another checked the diagnostic screen. Watched the amber light pulse again. Priya followed his eyes. "We finally isolated the encoder drift," she said. "Connector strain. The cable tests fine until the carriage reaches the far end of travel." Marcus smiled faintly. "So the fault report was accurate. The assumption about the cause wasn't. Seems to be a theme around here." He checked the time. 87 minutes. Before leaving, Marcus asked for one change to the review plan. "Don't just remove those disposition codes." Denise looked at him. "What would you do?" "Require a reason tied to a posted qualification before a recruiter can close someone before screening. If the reason is subjective, somebody else has to see it." The compliance manager wrote that down. Marcus reached the parking lot at 5:41 and found a text from Nia waiting. "Tacus, 6:15. This is a legally binding appointment." He typed back, "Leaving now." For once, he was early. Behind him, inside Vela, the recruiting analyst disabled pre-screen use of the 4 subjective disposition codes pending formal review. The formal review convened the following Tuesday in Vela's calibration lab because Denise refused to let it become another conference room exercise. 2 recruiting laptops sat on a steel workbench beside a test station used for torque tools. each loaded with a copy of the previous hiring workflow. Marcus stood behind a yellow floor line with Priya, while Denise, the compliance manager, Natalie Price, and Vela's head of human resources worked through the first reconstructed application. Evelyn joined by video from another plant. She had no vote on Marcus's candidacy, but as chief executive she had authority over the company-wide corrective action that might follow. "We're testing the process, not reenacting personalities," she said. "If the system permits a decision, we need to know exactly what permits it." The recruiting analyst opened an anonymized candidate file. Resume met every posted minimum qualification. Before any screening questions appeared, the old interface offered the same disposition menu Marcus had seen Thursday. Natalie folded her arms. "That doesn't mean recruiters were encouraged to misuse it." Denise looked at her. "No one said it did. I'm saying context matters. We were carrying 30 or 40 open roles at a time. Hiring managers complained constantly about candidates who looked qualified on paper but created problems later." "What kind of problems?" the compliance manager asked. Natalie hesitated. "Communication, expectations, whether someone understood the level they were applying for." Marcus stayed quiet until Denise asked him directly whether that explanation sounded operationally reasonable. "Part of it does," he said. Natalie looked almost surprised. "You need a way to close people who don't meet requirements. But if the requirement isn't written anywhere, then the recruiter becomes the requirement." The analyst started the simulation. Using Natalie's permissions and the old configuration, she selected professionalism without completing a screen. The system required no written explanation. One click changed the candidate from active to closed. A second click generated a rejection email. Total time, 11 seconds. Priya glanced at Marcus. He thought of line 4, where a cable could pass inspection until movement exposed the strain. The workflow had the same kind of weakness. It appeared orderly until someone put judgment under load. Denise moved to Marcus's own preserved file. His demographic information was masked, but the timestamps remained. At 8:14, no show had been entered. At 8:16, Officer Cole's visitor log recorded Marcus entering the lobby. At 8:19, Natalie added the confrontational response note. At 8:24, after Evelyn arrived, the status was reopened. Natalie leaned toward the screen. "I remembered the interview was at 8. I marked it before he arrived because I believed the panel had moved on." "Had you confirmed that?" Denise asked. "No. Had you checked whether his 20-minute window was still active?" Natalie looked at the projection. "No." The compliance manager asked the question Marcus had been waiting for. "Would you have made the same decision if a candidate you expected to succeed arrived at 8:16? Natalie's answer took time. "I don't know." Marcus believed her. That made the room harder, not easier. She rubbed one thumb across the edge of her badge. "I had an impression when he came in. The suit was wet. He looked rushed. Then he challenged the interpretation I gave him, and I read that as confirmation that I'd been right. No confession arrived. No dramatic sentence named everything neatly. What Natalie described was a chain of ordinary permissions: assumption, shortcut, subjective code, defensive note. Denise turned to want, added. He thought about the morning, about wanting Evelyn to erase the note once she knew what happened. "Yes, I was angry. I was also controlled. Those can both be true. But whether I looked annoyed shouldn't decide whether written instructions still applied." Evelyn spoke from the screen. "Agreed." The compliance manager then presented the broader sample. Of the 48 senior operations applications, 11 had been closed through subjective pre-screen codes. 8 lacked a documented job-related reason. 6 had been entered before any formal recruiter conversation. The data could not establish why every individual decision had been made, but it established that the control itself had failed. Denise slid a printed corrective action draft across the workbench. It proposed eliminating subjective pre-screen closures, requiring qualification-linked reasons, adding second-person review for exceptions, reopening affected applications, and auditing 6 months of future decisions. Marcus read the final page twice. "One thing's missing," he said. Natalie looked toward him. "Who checks whether the people reopening those applications are repeating the same assumptions with better paperwork?" Nobody answered immediately. Then Priya pulled the draft back toward herself and uncapped a pen. Priya added a new line to the corrective action draft: quarterly blind re-review of a random sample by managers outside recruiting. with original disposition notes hidden until the second assessment was complete. Denise read it once, then added that any unexplained difference in outcome would trigger a documented review rather than another informal conversation. Marcus watched the language take shape and felt something in him resist the relief. A better rule did not undo the applications already closed, and a cleaner workflow could still be bent by someone determined to bend it. The first decision came 2 days later. Vela's Human Resources Office sent written notices to the 17 applicants whose files had been reopened. 9 were still qualified for active or comparable positions. 4 had already accepted jobs elsewhere. 2 declined further contact. The remaining 2, including 1 candidate who had requested captioning, were invited back into active searches with accommodations documented before interviews were scheduled. Denise sent Marcus the summary because his preserved complaint had become part of the review record. Natalie's outcome was slower. She remained off candidate-facing work while interviews, system logs, and prior dispositions were reviewed. The investigation found repeated use of subjective codes without documented job-related reasons, including Marcus's file. It did not claim every decision was racially motivated. It did conclude that she had exercised discretion inconsistently and then written notes that made those decisions appear more objective than the underlying record supported. Still, she was removed from her lead recruiting role and placed on a final performance plan with no authority to close applications independently during the review period. Marcus read that section twice at his kitchen counter. Nia was beside him chopping cilantro for tacos with the concentration of a surgeon. "So they didn't fire her," she said. "No. Are you mad?" Marcus considered it. Nia scraped the cilantro into a bowl. "You wanted them to fire her. I wanted what happened to matter." She looked at him. That sounds different. It was. Marcus hated that she had heard the difference before he did. The following morning, Samuel called from the Vela floor. Team 4 was running behind him, the repaired connector now secured through a strain relief bracket that moved smoothly with the carriage. "We've completed the hiring review," he said. "Your technical score ranked first among the final candidates." Marcus gripped the edge of his workbench at his current plant. Samuel continued. "The administrative hold is lifted. We'd like to offer you the automation supervisor position." For a moment, Marcus heard only compressed air venting somewhere down the aisle and the ticking of a cooling motor casing. This was the call he had imagined for months, but it arrived stripped of the fantasy he had built around it. The job would not repair every dinner he had missed. It would not turn one better schedule into a different childhood for Naya. "What shift?" he asked. "Days, Monday through Friday. Emergency rotation 1 weekend every 6 weeks. Marcus smiled despite himself. "Start date? 3 weeks, if that works." It did. Then Samuel surprised him. "There's something else. Corrective Action Plan creates a 6-month operations liaison assignment for recruiting process reviews. Priya recommended you for it." Marcus laughed once. "You are offering me a second job before I've started the first." "Not a second job. 4 hours a month, paid, with authority to challenge workflow changes before rollout. You can decline it." Marcus thought of Nia's warning about missions. "I'll start with the job I applied for," he said. "Ask me again after 90 days. Samuel did not push. Fair answer. That evening, Marcus arrived home at 5:58 with the written offer folded inside his jacket pocket. Naya had set 2 plates on the table but made no celebration out of it until he handed her the letter. She read the first page, then looked up. "So you're actually going to be home? More often?" "That is not the same sentence." "No," Marcus said. "It isn't." She nodded, apparently satisfied that he had finally stopped promising machinery could do more than it was built to do. On Monday, Vela posted the revised hiring workflow internally. Subjective pre-screen codes were gone. Early closures required a posted qualification and a written reason. Exceptions needed second-person review. Quarterly blind audits were scheduled for the next year, and the reopened applicants remained part of the measurement. For the first time since walking into the lobby, Marcus could point to something that had changed outside his own file. He folded the offer letter again and placed it beside Naya's school calendar, where neither of them could pretend the new job belonged only to him. Marcus's first day at Vela began with a badge printer jam. The temporary card came out crooked, his photograph shifted slightly to one side, and the facilities clerk apologized as if the plastic itself had failed an inspection. Marcus rubbed a thumb over the warm edge before clipping it to his belt. 3 weeks earlier, another badge had helped decide who belonged inside the building. Now he's opened the production floor. Priya met him at line 4 before sunrise shift change. The repaired encoder carriage moved through its full travel without the amber fault returning. But she did not give Marcus time to admire it. Your crew has a backlog, 2 contractors who disagree about the new preventive maintenance interval, and 1 technician who thinks you got hired because the CEO knows you. Marcus stopped beside the guarded cell. Which technician? If I tell you first, you'll listen differently. He gave her a look. Priya smiled. Welcome to supervision. The morning meeting was less hostile than Marcus expected and more awkward. 12 technicians stood around a scarred steel table while he introduced himself without mentioning Evelyn, recruiting, or the review. He explained the priorities for the shift, asked who knew Line 4 best, and learned quickly that a senior technician named Raymond Ellis had rebuilt the carriage twice before the strain problem was found. Raymond kept his arms folded. So are we supposed to pretend you weren't part of the investigation? No, it's not an answer. Marcus felt the old urge to win the room in one clean response. He let it pass. I was a candidate whose application got closed incorrectly. I cooperated with the review. I didn't decide anyone's discipline, and I didn't write the new policy. Raymond looked toward the others. But your complaint changed it. Yes, the words sat there without decoration. Later that morning, Denise sent Marcus the final recruiting review. Had completed the internal response period and accepted reassignment to a non-lead sourcing role with restricted system permissions. Another recruiter received written coaching for using the same subjective code twice without documentation. The company found no basis for terminating the entire recruiting team, and Evelyn's office approved the corrective plan exactly as revised in the calibration lab. Marcus read the findings at his desk between maintenance calls. A part of him wanted a cleaner ending. Person clearly wrong, 1 decisive punishment, 1 line separating before from after. Instead, the report described a damaged control, inconsistent judgment, weak incentives, and people responsible in different degrees. At lunch, Evelyn found him in the cafeteria heating leftover tacos. I heard you survived the morning. Beige machine almost took me out. She laughed and sat across from him with a bowl of soup. For several minutes, they discussed line 4, not the interview. Marcus appreciated that more than he expected. Then Evelyn said, the board accepted the corrective plan. Quarterly results will be published internally for a year. Denise's team will track early closures, reversals after second review, accommodation handling, and differences between initial and blind assessments. Marcus nodded. Good. You don't sound relieved. I am. I just don't think dashboards make people fair. No. He looked at her. She stirred her soup once. They make unfair decisions harder to hide. That's a smaller promise, but I trust it more. Marcus thought about Nia asking whether he would actually be home. Smaller promises were becoming a theme. At 4:43, an alarm sounded from the packaging area. Not an emergency, but a production stop. Raymond called Marcus over to a palletizer where a new technician had locked out the machine after hearing an unfamiliar bearing noise. The line had already lost 18 minutes. Raymond pointed toward the silent motor. She probably overreacted. We can restart and watch it. Marcus listened near the housing. The sound was gone because the machine was stopped, which proved nothing. What did she hear? The new technician described a rhythmic scrape at the end of each return stroke. Raymond exhaled. You're behind schedule. Marcus looked at the production board, then at the lockout tag hanging from the disconnect. 3 weeks earlier, he had asked strangers to preserve an inconvenient record instead of cleaning it up. Now the same principle cost him production time on his first day. Leave it locked out, he said. We inspect before restart. Raymond stared at him, then reached for his tools. At 5:26, they found a loose guard bracket beginning to contact the moving frame. Marcus texted Naya before leaving the floor. Running 20 minutes late. Real reason this time. Her reply arrived before he reached the locker room. Sippable. Bring ice cream. Marcus smiled, unclipped his crooked badge, and headed for the parking lot. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same valet lobby where his application had once glowed red on a recruiter's screen. The revolving door clicked behind him as morning rain tapped lightly against the glass. His permanent badge hung straight now, replaced after the temporary one finally cracked at the corner. and the visitor tablet showed a new prompt before any recruiter could close an application. Select the post-ed qualification not met. If none applied, the candidate stayed active. The first quarterly audit had found 3 early rejections that outside reviewers reversed. The second found 1. By the third, none of the sampled files had been closed without a qualification-linked reason. Accommodation requests tracked separately from professionalism notes, and blind reviewers still disagreed with initial assessments, often enough that Denise refused to call the system fixed. She called it measurable. Marcus had learned to respect the distinction. 9 of the 17 reopened candidates had returned to Vela's hiring process. 4 eventually joined the company in different roles. The applicant who had requested captioning became a controls documentation specialist in another division. 2 others declined offers after finding work elsewhere, which Denise included in the published results instead of counting every reopened file as a company success. Natalie completed her performance plan but did not return to a lead role. She remained in sourcing with restricted disposition authority. Marcus had seen her twice in the cafeteria. The second time, she stopped beside his table. "I wanted to say something without making you responsible for making me feel better." Marcus set down his fork. She looked toward the windows rather than at him. "I was sure I could tell very quickly who would become difficult later. I thought that was experience." Marcus waited. Slum. "I was wrong about what I was measuring." It was not an apology polished for a report, and Marcus did not turn it into forgiveness. "I appreciate you saying that." She nodded and left him with his lunch. On the production floor, Marcus's crew had cut unplanned downtime on his lines by 11%, but the number he cared about more was harder to put on a board. The new technician who had stopped the palletizer on his first day had done it twice more. Both times, the problem was real. Raymond eventually stopped calling her cautious and started assigning her to difficult diagnostics because she listened before equipment failed loudly enough for everyone else to hear it. At home, Marcus still missed dinner sometimes. Emergency rotation remained emergency rotation, and management came with paperwork that followed him farther than he expected. But Nia no longer asked whether he would be home, as if preparing herself for disappointment. He kept Thursdays protected unless the plant was genuinely down. She had also banned him from promising anything using the phrase "should be fine." That evening, she was waiting outside her school with a poster tube under one arm when Marcus pulled up at 5:54. "You're early," she said, getting in. "Document it. I have standards now." He drove her to the district engineering showcase, where her project used inexpensive vibration sensors to flag bearing wear on small motors. Marcus resisted correcting the labels on her demonstration rig until she caught him staring. "Dad, I didn't say anything." "You were thinking in supervisor." He raised both hands from the dashboard. "Your machine." She smiled and carried it inside herself. The following Monday, Marcus accepted the 4-hour-a-month operations liaison assignment he had postponed when Samuel first offered it. He did not take it because he believed he could make hiring fair by sitting in more meetings. He took it because the role now had a narrow job: test workflow changes against real operating decisions before they reached candidates. His first packet contained no complaint from the old review. The opened file, no familiar name. It was a proposal for an automated resume ranking tool Vela planned to pilot at a different facility, with a requirement that someone from operations challenge, which signals the system treated as evidence of leadership experience. Marcus placed the packet beside the same worn interview folder he had carried through the lobby 6 months earlier. Then he texted Nia that Thursday dinner was still Thursday dinner, opened the first page, and began marking the questions the software would have to answer before anyone trusted its score.